right, welcome back everyone. My name is Nick. This channel is Swiftful Thinking, where we cover all things Swift, SwiftUI related. And in this video, we're going to take a little more of an advanced look at core data, and we're going to set up our data models in core data so that they have relations, so that they can connect and interact with each other. Now, before we begin, I want to point out that you should have a basic understanding of core data before we work on this. So if you don't, the last two videos in this series, I covered and introduced core data. So definitely watch those first and then come on back to this. And I also want to point out that most of the time, at least in my experience, when we're using core data in our apps, we very simply are just saving data, we are maybe updating and then getting data, but there's no complex relations that we really need to worry about. So in a lot of cases, the last two videos is everything you need to know about core data. However, sometimes as you start building more complex apps, you're going to want to add relations between the entities. And that's what this video is. So for those of you who are watching this entire playlist through, if there's one video to skip, it's probably this one, because what we're learning is really good to know, but it's not necessarily required and not something you're definitely going to use very often. But if you're interested, what we're going to do is really cool. We're going to take a very simple example and create three entities in our app. We're going to create businesses, departments, and employees. And all three entities are going to be related. So a business will have a bunch of different departments, and a business will also have a bunch of different employees. And the reverse will also be true. So an employee will be part of a business, and an employee will be part of a department. So when we set these up in core data, it becomes super efficient as an app developer, because all of these entities will always be relating to each other and they will always stay in sync, which is awesome. The last thing I want to mention is that to actually build out the entire UI to update businesses, employees, departments would probably take a very long time. It's basically building an entire application. So in this video, I decided we're just going to build a mock UI, and we're just going to play around by changing some of the inputs. So it's not going to be a full app, but I felt that this was the best and easiest way to run through all of these different examples so that you guys could get a real hands-on look on what's going on behind the scenes. All right, so those of you who are still here, thank you for listening. I admire your determination to learn this core data stuff. It's really cool. I'm excited, hope you're excited. Let's jump into Xcode and take a look. All right, welcome back everyone. I'm back in Xcode, and before we get started, I do just want to point out one more time that there is a prerequisite for this video, and that is the last video. So you should be familiar with the basics of core data already. But I'm going to move pretty quickly as we set up the basics of core data so we can focus on some of the more complicated things that we're looking at in this video, which predominantly is going to be the relationships within the core data entities. So with that said, if you're ready to go, let's right-click the navigator, create a new file for this video. Let's create a SwiftUI view, and let's call it Core Data Relationships Bootcamp. Go ahead and click Create. Once you're inside, let's click Resume on the canvas, just to make sure we're all connected. And I'm going to start this very similar to what we did in the last video. We're going to use kind of the MVVM architecture approach to create a view model for this view. So let's create a class. We'll call it Core Data Relationship View Model. Let's make it conform to observable objects so that we can observe it from the view, and let's open the brackets. Let's initialize this in the view, so we'll do an @stateObject var. Let's call it VM, and it'll be equal to a new core data relationship, and it looks like I spelled it wrong, relationship view model. Open and close the parentheses, and now we have access to the view model. And I'm going to take this actually one step further in this video and take the code for core data and actually put it into another class that will be a singleton instance that we could then access across our entire app. So let's create another class. We'll call this Core Data Manager. Let's open the brackets. Let's make it a singleton by adding static let instance equals Core Data Manager, open and close the parentheses. And in this core data manager, let's initialize and set up our core data. So let's start by importing core data to this file. And now we're going to set up core data just like we did in the last video. So I'm going to move kind of quickly. We first need our container. Let's call it let container of type ns persistent container. And I'm going to add one more variable here, which is going to be the context that is inside this container. So let's just call it let context. And this will be of type ns managed object context. All right, let's create it. Let's initialize it now. Let's create our init, open and close parentheses, open the brackets. We'll set container equal to an ns persistent container with the name completion. And we haven't set this up yet, so let's leave it as a blank string. And then we're going to say container.load persistent stores. And we have our completion handler. Let's press enter on that. I'm going to make this a little bigger. We have the description, which we're not going to use, and error. And we'll just say if let error equals error, we'll print error loading core data. And then we will print out / open close parentheses and print out the error. And then lastly, we need to set up our context, and the context is going to be equal to the container.viewContext. So now we have our initializer. We're going to add one more function to this manager to save the data. So we'll say func save, open close parentheses, open the brackets. And in here, we're simply going to call context.save. And we're going to get these super helpful error messages in Xcode. So just reading this, the call can throw, but it's not marked with try. So let's mark it with try. And then, of course, it can throw, but we're not catching the errors. So we're going to add this to a do statement, put our code inside, and then we're going to catch let error. And if this doesn't work, it's going to come down here. It's going to catch the error, and we're going to create a variable with the error. And we're going to print out error saving, and then let's / open close parentheses and print out the error dot localized description. Let's make this actually error saving core data. So if there's ever an error, we should get this printout and figure out why. And that's it for our core data manager for now. Let's add a reference to this instance into our view model. So in the view model, we're going to say let manager. We're going to set it equal to the core data manager.instance. Again, this is our singleton instance up here. All right, so now it's time to actually start setting up our NS persistent container and our core data information. So just like in the last video, we created a container. We're going to create a new container for this video. So let's right click the navigator, create a new file. It's going to be a core data model. Click on that and click next. And let's call this core data container. Go ahead and click create. And I just want to confirm that if you follow my last video, we named the last one fruits container and we're naming this one core data container. Just make sure that they are different names, because if you used core data container for whatever reason, you can't have two containers with the same name. So we have our core data container here, and now we can add some entities into this container. And this video is all about relationships. So we're going to create 3 different entities that are all going to be related to each other. And before we actually add these entities, I'm going to put some notes just to talk you guys through what we're about to do. So jumping back into the core data relationship bootcamp, I'm just going to put a quick note up here. We're going to add 3 entities. The first one is going to be a business entity. The second one is going to be a department entity. And the third one is going to be an employee entity. And we're going to pretend like our app, for whatever our app does, it basically lists a bunch of businesses. And within each business is going to be a bunch of departments. And then within each department is going to be a bunch of employees. So in real life, you could pretty easily see how these are all related, and there are relationships, right? Every employee should be a part of a department, and that department should be a part of a business. So basically we're going to set all three of these up, and then we're going to define the relationships between each of them. All right, go into the container. Let's click on Add Entity down here at the bottom. Click on the name here to edit the name, and let's call this Business Entity. You don't technically need to include the word entity at the end of this, but I like to, so that in our code we know that everything with the word entity at the end is actually a core data entity. And each business in our app is going to have a name. So let's add an attribute, and we'll call it name. And the name of the business will be of type string. And in a real app, there probably will be more attributes here, like your business might have a subtitle and a description and an address, but we're going to keep this simple for this tutorial's sake, and just every business only has a name. Let's then create another entity, and we're going to call this one department entity. So within a business is going to be a couple departments. And departments, of course, will also have names. So let's add an attribute, name. And this will be of type string. And now that we have both of these entities, let's just jump back into the business entity and let's add a relationship to the department. So let's click the plus sign here for the relationship. And we're going to call this departments, because a business could have multiple departments, and that's why I'm adding the S here. So the relationship destination is going to be where this business is, where this relationship is linking to, and the business is linking to the departments, of course. So we'll add department entity. And then there is no inverse, which is basically, is the department entity also linked to the business? So right now it says no inverse, but we're going to actually add this now. So in the department entity, let's add a relationship. And we're going to add here businesses. And this says no inverse, and that's basically asking if the department entity also has a relationship back to the business. And we're going to add that in 1 second, and this will change. But while we're still here and we're clicked on this departments, we're going to open up the inspector, and we're going to look at this type here. And using this type, we can either pick to one or too many. It's basically asking us in the relationship between the business and the department entity. Although we added the S here, core data doesn't actually know if there can be multiple departments in this relationship or only one. Because if we wanted to connect a business so that a business could only have one department, we would make this relationship one. But of course, a business can have multiple departments. This is why we included the S here. And because it could have multiple, we're going to set this as too many. So now one business can have multiple departments. Let's go set up the inverse now. We're going to jump into the department entity. We're going to click on relationship. We're going to click on the plus to add a new relationship, and we're going to call this businesses. And the destination here is going to be the business entity. And now when we click on the inverse, we can find the inverse relationship from the businesses to the departments, which we just called departments. So we'll click on that. And then we need to talk about the type here. And this is asking, can a department have multiple businesses? So before, when we did the type, it was, can a business have multiple departments? That's definitely a yes. But now, can a department have multiple businesses? That's a question for you as the developer. Because if we had two different businesses, let's pretend like we had Apple and Microsoft. Both of those businesses would have an engineering department. But now in our app, do we want to make one engineering department and have that include people from Apple and Microsoft? Or do we want to have one engineering department for Microsoft and a totally separate engineering department for Apple? So if we wanted them to be totally separate and we have to create a new department for each business, then we keep this as too one. But I'm going to create it as too many, so that when we add an engineering department, we could add that same department to Apple, to Microsoft, and to other businesses. I know this is a little confusing, but it's going to make much more sense when we actually start testing it out in a few seconds. Let's add one more entity. Let's call this employee entity. And now our employees are going to have a name. So let's add an attribute let that will be a string. Let's give our employees an age, and that will be an int. We'll use integer 16. And maybe we'll give them a date joined, and we'll make this a date, just to get some practice with attributes here. So employees have these 3 attributes, and now we got to add the relationships for employees. So let's start back at the top. In our business entity, in our relationships, let's add employees, because every business is going to have employees. So we'll add a plus, we'll say employees. The destination here, of course, will be the employee entity. We'll leave the inverse blank for a second, and the question is, does our business have one employee entity or many? And of course, a business will have many employees, so we'll keep this as too many. Let's jump into the department entity. Now let's add a relationship between the department and the employees. So we'll add a plus here, and we'll say employees. The destination here, of course, will be the employee entity. And again, we have to ask, does the department have one employee, or do they have possibly many employees? And we're going to switch it to too many, because the department could probably have many employees. Now let's jump into the employee entity. Let's add a relationship, and let's call this business. And the destination here will be the business entity, and the inverse of this will be the employees. So now that we added this, I just want to point out that if we jump back into the business entity, the employees now has that inverse, which is called business. And if we jump into the employee entity, business is right here. It automatically syncs that these are the inverse. And the question again is, can an employee have more than one business? Well, I think each employee is probably going to be an employee of a single business, not many. So let's keep this as 2-1 this time. And then again, we'll add a department. And the destination here will be the department entity. And the inverse, of course, will be the employees, because in the department entity, we added the employees relationship, which now the inverse is the department. So we have that set up. And again, we can ask ourselves, can an employee belong to multiple departments or one single department? And I'm going to say that they can only belong to one single department. So we're going to keep the type again as 2-1. And that was a lot of talking, but that's all the setup we really need to do to get business, department, and employees into our app. And before we leave this screen, I'm going to go down to the bottom right here, this little editor style, and switch it to this graph here, just to show you guys there's a nice little UI here that comes with core data. And it's basically showing us that we have employees, businesses, and departments, and they are all related to each other. So we can see by these arrows here that there is a relationship between the business and the employee. If I click on this one, it's between the business and the department. And you could imagine here how this could get increasingly more complex if you had a lot of entities and a lot of layers into your core data app. But right now, we got these 3 entities all connected. Let's actually add this into our app so that we can get a better understanding of what we actually just did. So jumping back into the core data relationships bootcamp file that we set up at the beginning, let's click resume on the canvas quick. I'm going to close the inspector. All right, let's scroll on down to the view model here. And before we begin, I just want to throw out there that what we're about to do is for the sake of learning in this video. It's obviously not going to be a realistic UI for an actual app, but I felt that this setup, what we're about to do, is the easiest way to actually learn how we're going to use core data. So I hope you guys agree that it is a little easier, because if we created an entire UI to fully handle all of these relationships, it would take hours and hours. It would basically be creating an entire app. And this is supposed to be just a quick video on how to use relationships. Let's start with an at published var. Let's call this businesses. And this will be of type an array of business entity. Let's set it equal to a blank array. And sometimes I find that immediately after you add these entities in a new container, we get this error that Xcode can't find the business entity. So I find that the easiest way to solve it is to just restart Xcode. So I'm going to do that real quick. Alright, so I restarted Xcode. Business entity is now green. It can find it. Let's create a very simple func add business. Open close parentheses, open the brackets. And when we call this, we're going to create a new business. And again, I covered adding items to core data in the last video, so I'm going to move quickly here. Let's say let new business equals a new business entity. Open the parentheses, and we need to add a context to it. And we're going to get the context from our core data manager up here where we have our context. So we're going to say manager.context. And remember, the manager is this instance that we set up right here. So now we have our blank new business. And if you remember in our container, when we have our business entity, every business has a name. So let's give this business a name. We'll say new business.name. And we'll set it equal to Apple, which will be our first business. Of course, as iOS developers, we love Apple, and it just makes sense to make that our first business. Now that we have this business in the context, all we need to do is save it. So let's create another func. We'll say save, open close parentheses, open the brackets. And in our function save, we're going to call manager.save. We're going to add to this in a second, but from our new business, we'll call save. Alright, trying to keep it simple for you guys. Let's go down to the view here. Let's add a navigation view. Open the brackets. Inside, let's add a scroll view. Open the brackets. Inside, we'll add a VStack with spacing of maybe 20. Open the brackets. Inside the VStack, let's add a button. Let's use the action and label. And the action is going to be VM, or view model, dot add business. And then the button, let's just make it look better. We'll set the text to say perform action, because we're going to change this action as we go on in this video. Let's set the foreground color to white, the background color to color.blue. Before we set the background, let's actually make the frame with a height of 55. Let's set the frame with a max width of infinity. On the background, let's add a corner radius of 10. Let's click resume on the canvas to see what we built. At the bottom of the scroll view, let's add a navigation title. Let's say relationships. Alright, and then on the VStack, let's just add some padding to push it in a little. Alright, so we have our button to perform an action. Before we run this, let's go back up, and in our save function, after we save, let's just print saved successfully, just so we know that we are actually saving. And because we're using core data, I'm going to actually do all of our testing on an actual device, not on this not on the canvas here. And the last thing we need to do before we can actually run this is set up that container. So back up way at the top here, we set up our NS persistent container and we gave it a blank string. The name should be core data container. So we'll say core data container. And it's important to make sure that this string here is exactly as the name of your container is, which is that other file that we created a few minutes ago. Alright, let's test this out now. I'm going to put it on a simulator because we're going to mess with the core data, so the data will actually save on my simulator. So I'm going to hide the canvas. Let's go down to our view, core data relationship bootcamp view. I'm going to copy the name here. I'm going to jump into our app.swift file. This is where your app main call is. It should be the name of your project app. And let's just make our new view the first view. And then let's run it on a simulator. So up here, I'm going to make sure my device is an iPhone 12. And let's click run. And a simulator should now pop up. I'm going to jump back into our code here. I'm going to close the navigator on the left side. Alright, and when it loads, the console is probably going to pop up at the bottom. Sometimes in SwiftUI you get these warning error messages that it's unable to configure constraints. We didn't do anything fancy in our screen here. We just have a navigation view, scroll view, VStack. So I'm not really going to worry about what all this nonsense that's printing out. But what I am looking for is when we click this perform action, back up, it should call vm.addBusiness. And that should then create a new business, call it Apple, and then click save. And once it saves, it should call manager.save, which in our manager should then print out save successfully. So this is what I'm looking for it to say. So I'm going to click on the button quick, and we got saved successfully. So now we do know our core data is set up, it is saving. And now we just need to add one quick function to actually fetch the businesses so we can put them onto the screen. Let's call func get businesses, open close parentheses, open the brackets. Just like in the last video, we need a fetch request. So we'll say let request equals ns fetch request, open the parentheses, and we need an entity name. And the name, of course, is going to be business entity. And we need to make sure that this string here, business entity, is exactly the same as the entity name in our container here. So business entity. It might even be case sensitive, so just watch out for that. And then an ns fetch request is generic. It could have any kind of entity. So we just need to let it know exactly what kind of entity this name is. And of course, it is a business entity. So we're going to use the less than sign and the greater than sign and then put the business entity inside. I'm going to be doing a video on generics in this course in a couple videos, so it's okay if you don't fully understand what this means just yet. But right now we have a request to get all of the business entities in our app. And then let's fetch it from the context. So we'll say manager.context.fetch. And here we can pass in a ns fetch request. And we'll pass in our request. We're going to get the error message that the call can throw, can be marked with try. So we'll add our do statement. So we'll add our do catch statement. And the try call will be this. The catch will say let error. And then here we'll print out error fetching. And then let's just print out the error dot localized description. All right, this shouldn't cause an error, but just in case, we're being safe with the do catch. Lastly, the result of this, if this is successful, is unused. So let's just set it equal to the businesses. So we'll say businesses equals try that. All right, in our view model, we'll create an init. And as soon as it's initialized, we'll call get businesses. So it gets it as soon as it loads. Lastly, we need to put these businesses into our screen so that we can see what actually loads. So let's create a view. Let's go down here. Let's do it actually way at the bottom. Let's create a new view. We'll call it struct. We'll say business view. And this will be conform to view. Every view needs a body. And in our business view, we will be passing in our business entity. So we'll say let entity of type business entity. And let's just add a very simple view here. We'll add a VStack, open the parentheses. Let's do alignment of leading, spacing of 20. And in the content, let's add a text saying name, colon, and let's add a backslash, open close parentheses. And in here, we'll add the entity.name. And this name is optional, so we'll just add 2 question marks, and if we don't have the name, we'll leave it as a blank string. Let's give this a bold. Let's make this bold. And then if we go into our business, in addition to having a name, a business can have departments and it can have employees. So I also want to just list those out quickly. So going back, we'll say if let departments equals entity dot departments, And the departments here is an NS set, and we want to convert it into an array. So we'll say departments.allObjects. This turns it into an array of type any. And we're going to try to cast it with an as question mark as an array of department entity. And we'll open the brackets. So this all objects is giving us an array of type any, and we're going to just here check that it's actually an array of department entity. So if this is true and we get our departments, these will be an array of department entity. And then in here we'll just add a text saying departments. I'll make that dot bold, and then let's just do for each, open the parentheses. We use the first completion here, and we'll do for each department. Press enter on the content. This will be for each department. And let's just add the text of the department dot name, because each department has a name. And again, we'll do the 2 question marks and a blank string just in case the department doesn't have a name. So this should give us a list of the departments. And one more time, we're going to say if let employees equals entity dot employees dot all objects as an array of employee entity. Open the brackets. And we're going to do the same thing that we did above. We'll say text employees colon, make that bold. We'll have a for each, and this will be for each employees. Press enter, employee, and here we'll just have text of employee dot name, otherwise blank string. All right, on the entire VStack, let's add some padding. Let's add a frame with a max width. Let's do of maybe 300. And let's give it an alignment of leading. Let's give this a background of color.gray.opacity of 0.5. And let's give it a corner radius of 10. Let's top it off with a shadow of 10. And I think that should look decent. Again, we're not going for the looks here, we're going for the functionality. So now that we have our business view, let's add one to the screen. And below the button, I'm going to add another scroll view. Open the parentheses. We're going to use the completion with the shows indicators. This scroll view will be horizontal. Shows indicators we'll keep as true for now. Why not? And in the content, let's add a H stack. Let's give it an alignment of top. Open the brackets, and inside this H stack, let's add, we'll say for each, open the parentheses, and we'll do vm.businesses. Click enter on the content. This will be for each business. And then we're just going to add a business view and pass in the business. So again, this VM is the view model, and then the businesses is referencing that businesses array that we set up a little while ago, which should be filled in on the init when we call get businesses, and it gets all of the business entities from core data, puts them into this published variable. All right, a lot of setup here, but now we're moving. Let's click play on the simulator one more time to reload it, and hopefully it's going to fetch our business. All right, so we have our business view pulling in here, and it's in a horizontal scroll view, which we can't really tell right now because we only have this one item. But the business we added was Apple, and we can see that it has the name Apple. There are no departments underneath the departments, and there are no employees, but we did add our business successfully. And I just want to add now into the save function, every time we save, I want to actually also call get businesses so that it reloads the screen here. So we'll say save, and we'll call get businesses. And before we move forward, I want to show you a couple of things that we could call in our add business here that we didn't call. The first thing we could have done is add existing departments to the new business. And to do that, we would have called new business dot departments and set that equal to an array of all of the departments we want to include into that business. Of course, we don't have any departments yet, so we didn't do this and we just left it blank. We also could have add existing employees to the new business. And to do that, we could have called new business.employees and set that equal to an array of employees. So all of the existing employees we could have put into this new business. Of course, we didn't have any, so we didn't do that either. We could have also added the new business to an existing department. So if we had a department and we wanted to give that department this business, we could have done that by calling new business.add to departments. Of course, we didn't have a department yet, so we didn't do that. And lastly, we could have add new business to existing employee. And to do that, we would have called new business.add to employees. Of course, we did not do that. So we're going to actually add some of these in a second, but I just wanted to lay out all the things we could have done there. So in our app, we just have one business right now called Apple. I'm going to fold up this function click by using the command option left. Again, you could always click the editor and code folding and fold. And then below this, let's do a func add department. Open close parentheses, open the brackets. And just like add business, we're going to say let new department equals department entity, open the parentheses, add it to a context. This will be the manager.context. And back in our container, every department had a name as well. So we'll say new department.name. We'll set this equal to the marketing department. And jumping back into the container quickly, every department has businesses and employees. And if you remember, we set these as too many. So when we go to add businesses, you'll see if we call new department.businesses, it's actually expecting an NS set. And it's expecting a set because it has the option of having many. If we put it as to one, it would expect one single entity here. So we'll add businesses and we'll set it equal to a blank array. And in this array, we will add one business for now, which will just be our first business. So I'm going to get that from the businesses up here. We'll call businesses and we'll use the brackets to access the first item at 0, which we know is valid, which is the Apple. So we're going to add a department named marketing, and we're going to add it as part of the Apple business. Just like after we added a business, let's then call save. And let's call add department now. So down in our bootcamp view, instead of add business, when we click the button, let's call add department. And before we actually do this, I just want to force reload the whole screen so that we can always see all the updated information here. So back in our save, when we call save, let's just first remove all of the current data. So we'll say businesses.remove all. And then we'll call dispatch queue.main.async after. Let's give it now plus 1 second. And then let's just put our calls inside to save and then refetch. And we'll have to add the self here. So in a real app, I wouldn't add this, but I just want to purposely force reload the whole screen. So 1 second delay, and then we will save and refetch the businesses. All right, now we have our add department function. Let's go ahead and click play to rerun the app onto the simulator. And when I click add department, it should now create a new department entity, call it marketing, and then add Apple, the business Apple, as a business for this department. So when I click this button, hopefully it pops up here underneath departments. I'm going to perform action. And save successfully prints out to the console, and we can see that Apple, the business Apple, now has a department called marketing. And that's exactly what we wanted, right? We added the department with a business. Now before we move forward, let's add another view to our screen so that we can see all of the departments. So moving down, we have our business view, and I'm just going to copy our business view and then paste it below. I'm going to call it department view. The entity will be a department entity. We'll leave the name as is, but departments don't have departments, they have businesses. So we'll change this to businesses, and it'll be an array of business entity. We'll change this to text to say businesses. And let's make this say businesses as well. And then we'll have to change this, and this will be business, and this will be business.name. Departments can also have employees, so we can actually leave this section as is. And then the background for this row, I'm just going to make it maybe green, just to separate. The businesses are gray, the departments will be green. Let's take our department view, let's scroll back up, and underneath this scroll view here in our main view, I'm just going to copy this, paste another horizontal scroll view underneath it. Then we need a data array of departments. So scrolling back up again, and this is why I was saying this is not a beginner level video, there's a lot going on here. Let's create another @published var. Let's call it departments of type array of department entity equals a blank array. Let's take these departments and put it on the screen. So moving back down, we have our loop here on the businesses, and then loop down here will be on the departments. This will be for each department. And then of course we will add a department view, and that will pass in a department. And now let's just populate that departments array. So scrolling back up again, we have our function to get businesses. Let's just copy that, and let's paste another function. Let's call this get departments. This request is going to return department entity type, and of course this is called department entity. We're going to set departments variable, which we just created up here, equal to the result of the fetch, and we'll keep the error message the same. That's fine. Let's call get departments from the init, so they will load when we load the app. And moving down in our save, let's also call departments.removeAll. And when we reload, let's also call self.getDepartments. All right, I'm gonna run the simulator, and hopefully if we do everything right, we can see the departments start to pull in as well. And beautiful. All right, so in our view, we have this scroll view. This horizontal scroll view will be all the businesses, which right now is just one. It says Apple. And then this one will be all of the departments, and right now it's just one. This is the marketing department, and it has businesses of Apple and no employees. Everything's working so far. And now, as you probably guessed, let's add an employee. So scrolling to our view model, I'm going to fold up the add business code. Before we actually fold this up, I just want to point out that when we added the business, we had the option to add departments and employees. And similarly, when we add departments, we can add businesses and employees. I'm not going to go through and type out all this code like we did up here, but we could have done a bunch of other options in the add department as well. You can play around with that in your own time. Let's fold up this code by pressing the command option left arrow just to fold it up, make it shorter. I'm going to fold this one as well. And you can always click the editor, code folding, and fold. And then let's create a func add employee. Open close parentheses, open the brackets. And we're going to create a let new employee equals an employee entity. And we're going to pass it into the manager.context. Now, if we click on the container and we look at the employee entity, employees can have an age, which is an integer, a date joined, which is a date, and a name. So let's do that quick. We'll say new employee.age. Let's say maybe 25. New employee dot date joined, and we'll set it to today's date. And we'll say new employee dot name, and let's say Chris. All right, once we have this employee, we can then add them to a business or a department. So when we call new employee dot business, you'll notice here that it does not look for a set like the department had. We just have a single business entity. And that's because in our container, the relationship for an employee to a business is 2-1. So an employee can only have one business. So going back, just to point out, in the add department, the businesses accepted an array of businesses because a department could have multiple businesses, but an employee can only have one business. And let's set that equal to businesses, and we'll just do the first one, which is Apple right now. We'll also say new employee dot department. And we'll set that equal to departments, and we'll set it equal to the first department, which is the marketing department. After we add the employee, we just need to call save. So let's call this down in our button, add employee. And lastly, I just want to also put the employees down on our view here. So I'm going to go down to the department view. I'm going to copy our department view. I'm going to paste below it. And let's call this employee view. The entity will be an employee entity. And an employee can only have one business. So I'm just going to add a text. We'll call it business, : let's make it bold. And then we'll add another text. And here we'll call the entity dot business dot name. And if there is none, we will just do 2 question marks and the blank string. We'll also add a text for the department. We'll make that bold. And then we'll add another text, entity dot department dot name. Otherwise, blank string. And we will just delete this bit of code down here. Very simple. Let's finally make it color.blue.opacity 5 so that the employees will be blue. Let's take our employee view and move up to our main view. Let's copy this scroll view for the departments, add another scroll view, and we need to loop on an array of employees. So scrolling back up into our view model. I know this was a lot of setup. I'm sorry guys. This is the easiest way I could find to explain all of this. At published var employees of type an array of employee entity, and we'll set this equal to a blank array. Let's create another function, copy this get departments, we'll call get employees. This request will get employee entities, and of course it will be called employee entity. We'll set employees equal to the result of the request, and we'll keep this the same. Let's call get employees on the init. And finally, when we click save, let's call employees.removeAll. And then on the reload, we'll call self.getEmployees. All right, that was a lot of setup again. And actually, one more thing we need to do is on that scroll view, let's loop on the employees. So we'll say vm.employees. This will be for each employee. And of course, we want the employee view, and we're going to pass in our employee. That was a lot of setup. I hope it works. I really don't know an easier way to explain all of this to you guys. In my button, it's going to add an employee, and hopefully they will pop up on the screen. So let's run the simulator one more time. And remember, in our add employee function, we're creating Chris, and we're assigning him to the first business, which is Apple, and the first department, which is marketing. Let's perform action. And now that when it reloads, we have Apple has the marketing department and employees of Chris. Marketing has businesses of Apple and employees of Chris. And Chris, of course, has the business of Apple and the department of marketing. On Chris, let's also add that other information we have for him. So let's move back down to the employee entity. And I'm just going to add text. Let's do age, :, // open close parentheses. We'll do entity.age. And text, we'll say date joined, : / open close parentheses. We will call entity.dateJoined. And if we don't have date joined, we will use the regular today's date just for now. And let's run it one more time. Hopefully we can see that extra data that we have on the employee entity. Cool, Chris, date joined on Wednesday. I'm not going to worry about this because I don't really care what the date is. I just wanted to show you guys. I just wanted to give you guys some practice with actual additional attributes, because chances are in a real app, these entities will have more attributes. All right, now that we have all of our views set up, all of our stuff set up, let's get cooking here and do some cool stuff. So this time, let's do it in reverse. So this time I'm going to add another user without adding them to a department or to a business. So we will go, so let's go back up to our functions here in our view model. I'm going to fold some of these up just because it's a lot of code. We have our get functions, we have our add business, our add department, add employee, and I'm going to add another employee. So let's make this one maybe age 99. We'll use today's date. We'll say Emily. And we're not going to add her to a business, and we're not going to add her to a department. So let's run it. I think add employee is still the function in the button right now. So now I'm adding Emily. Let's perform the action. All right. So at the bottom, I have two employees, Emily. She doesn't have any businesses and she doesn't have any department, right? And now let's do the reverse. So now we're going to add a new department. So I'm going to minimize my add employee, go into the add department. And this time, let's create a department called engineering. And I'm not going to add this department to a business right now. So we're going to comment this out. But I do want to add Emily to this new engineering department. So there's two ways I could do it. I could say new department.employees. And here it expects an array of employees. And I could add Emily. So Emily is the second person in our employees array right now. And I could just add here employees and access the second person in the array with the number 1. And that would add Emily to this new engineering department. But another way I could do it is also call new department.add2employees. And here I could pass in Emily. So I could pass in employees 1. So I'm going to add, so that's what I'm going to do for this one. And let's take this function and put it into our button. So vm.addDepartment. Let's run the simulator quick. And this time when I click on the perform action, it should create a new department called engineering and then add existing employee, which is the second person in our array, which is Emily here, to this new engineering department. So let's see. Let's perform action. We have our engineering department. It's not part of any business yet, and it includes Emily. And Emily is now updated as part of the engineering department. She, of course, doesn't have a business either. Let's now add another business. So I'm going to fold up the add department and let's add a business. Let's add Microsoft. So this will be a new business named Microsoft. And Microsoft, I'm going to add departments to Microsoft. We have the marketing and we have the engineering department. I'm going to pretend like Microsoft has both of these departments. So in this array of departments, I'm going to include departments 0 and departments 1. So Microsoft will get both of those departments. And then I'm going to add employees to Microsoft. And just like in the last one where we called the add departments, there was two ways. We could add the employees, or we could add two employees. And here we have the employees. We could also add two employees. But I'm going to use this completion, and we're just going to add Emily. So employees 1, because she's the second person in the employees array. All right, let's take this add business, make that our function. Let's run the simulator. Let's click perform action. We have a new business in our app that has two departments, the engineering and the marketing department, and employee is Emily. If I scroll down to our departments, you can see that marketing now has updated because marketing is part of Apple as well as Microsoft. And of course, Chris is the only employee in the marketing department. Engineering now has one business, part of Microsoft, is not part of Apple, and employees include Emily. And of course, if I look at Emily's profile, she is now part of Microsoft and the engineering department. So I think you guys are starting to get now why we added all of this data here and why we added all these relationships, because it does really get complex. All right, while we're here, let's add a little bit more data so that we can start querying on some data, because that's also very important to learn here. I'm going to add one more business while we're here. Let's call it, we got Apple, we got Microsoft. Let's call this one Facebook. And Facebook, let's not give it any departments right now. And let's also not give it any employees. So just a business we're adding. I'm going to run the app, and we should have add business in the code here, add business. So I'm going to click the button. We should now get Facebook. Let's add another department. So I'm going to add a department here. Let's add the finance department. And let's add this finance department to some businesses. Let's add it to all three businesses we have. So we'll do business 0, businesses 1, and businesses 2. While we're doing this, I'm also going to update Emily to be part of the finance department. So here I'll say new department dot, and I'll call dot add to employees. And here I'm going to add Emily. So it's the employees 1. So let's add the add department to the button. Click play. Okay. So we have only the marketing and engineering department. And right now, Emily is part of the engineering department, and Facebook doesn't have any departments. Let's perform action. Facebook now has a finance department. Microsoft has a finance department. Apple has a finance department. If we go down, engineering no longer has any employees because we changed Emily's status as from the engineering team to the finance team. So under the finance department, we can see that it is now part of all of these businesses, and Emily is an employee. And if I scroll down, we look at Emily's profile, she now is part of the finance department. And lastly, a little more setup, let's add 2 more employees. So let's code fold the department, open up the add employee. Let's add an employee that is maybe 21 years old. Let's call him John. And let's add him to a business. So let's add him to, let's see, who doesn't have employees yet? I just realized I spelled employees wrong all over this screen. So I'm going to fix that quick. Employees 1, employees 2, and that's it. All right. Sorry. So we're adding a new employee called John, and let's add him to Facebook. So that's businesses number 2, which is the 3rd in the array. And let's also give him a department. So looking at the departments, The engineering doesn't have any employees, so let's add him to the engineering department. So that's department 1, because it's the second in the array. So let's call add employee now. I'm going to rerun the simulator. Perform action. Alright, engineering now has John, of course. Facebook has an employee of John. And I do notice here that Facebook only has a finance department, and yet John is an employee of the engineering department. So that could be like a safe check that we might have to add in our app. So obviously that is not very good for this tutorial. In your app, when you were actually like adding John, you would probably create a picker or like a drop down to select all of the departments that are actually in Facebook, in the company that John belongs to. So when you did that, it would only give you the Facebook departments. Obviously, we're just like manually adding to random departments here. So that's why we're getting this like kind of issue. But that's not really what we're looking at right now. We now have a new employee, age 21. He works at Facebook and he's part of the engineering department. Just to fix that, let's update Facebook and give them an engineering department. So let's create another func. We will call func update business, open close parentheses, open the brackets. And we'll say let existing business equals, and let's get the Facebook entity, which is our businesses, and it's the third, which is index number 2, and we'll call existing business dot add to departments, and we want to add the marketing, and we want to add the engineering department, which is the second, so we'll call departments 1, and after we update that, all we have to do is call save. So let's put this update business into our app, into the button, run this one more time. And when I perform this action, we should now see that Facebook also has the engineering department. All right, so I'm not going to run through updating employees and departments. It's the same thing that we did for the business here. You basically just get the current entity and then update whatever you want to update to it. You could update the name, you could update the departments, the employees, basically the same way that we just did here. All right, so now we have this pretty complex app here with a lot of relationships. We have 3 different companies. We have 3 different departments, and we have 1, 2, 3 different employees. Now, another really important thing we can do here is sort and filter on these queries. So the easiest way to look at this, let's start with the businesses here. And when we call get businesses, right now it's creating a fetch request. It's just getting all of the businesses and putting them on our screen. But chances are you're going to want to order the businesses as they come on the screen. So right now we have Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, but we could also maybe put them in alphabetical order, let's say, just for example here. And to do that, we would call on the request. We would say request.sort descriptors, and then we need an array of ns sort descriptor. So let's actually create that first. We'll say let sort equals ns sort descriptor, open the parentheses, and then we can use the key path and ascending completion. And what do we want to sort on in the business entity? So the key path will be the backslash, and we'll call business entity dot name. So we'll sort on the name and we'll make ascending true. And then the request will add the request.sort descriptors will set equal to an array, and we'll just include this new sort. So now when we call get businesses, it should be sorting by name. Let's run the app one more time to check this out. Now we have Apple and then Facebook and then Microsoft. So our sort worked, and it was that easy to sort this request. Awesome. And we can also add filtering into this. And to filter, we could say request.predicate. Predicate is basically just a fancy word for filter here. And the predicate needs to be of type NS predicate. So we'll say let filter equals NS predicate. Open the parentheses. And we're going to look for the completion with the format here. And the format for predicate is a little weird. Something you kind of just have to memorize or save it somewhere. And just for simplicity's sake, let's say the name. So this exact string right here, the name, we literally have to type in name. And we'll set it equal to, and then we'll have a percent and an @ sign. I know it's a little funky, but we want the name to be equal to, and then this is what we want it to actually be equal to. So let's put Apple. Then I'll say request.predicate equals the filter. Let's run this app, and now it should sort, but more importantly, filter only on businesses that are called Apple. So we should only get one result here. Let's run this. Alright, so we added a predicate for the name of Apple. I want to show you guys one more way that we can use the NS predicate. But for right now, I'm going to actually remove this filter and rerun just so we can get all of our businesses back. And this time, let's do a filter on the departments, and let's get all of the departments that maybe Apple has. So Apple definitely has a marketing department. They don't have an engineering department, and they do have a finance department. And I want to do one more predicate that's pretty cool. Let's fold up this code here for get businesses, get departments, get employees. And actually for the get employees, let's copy this one and then paste it. And this time we'll say get employees for business. We'll create a local name of business, and it will be of type business entity. So right now our basic request is getting all of these employees. But I want to do a filter so that we only get employees that are maybe part of Apple. So in this request, we can say let filter equals NS predicate format, and we'll say, and here we'll create a string. And if we look at the container and look at the employee entity, I could filter on an employee's age, date joined name, or the business or department they're in. So we're going to filter on the business, and the business is a business entity. So we need to actually filter on an entity, not just like a string. So here we'll say business is equal to %@, and we will pass in the business from our function here into here. Then we just need to call request.predicate is equal to this filter. And finally, let's call this function from our button. So scrolling down, in the button, I'm going to call vm.get employees, and we'll say for business entity, and let's use the first business. So we'll do for Apple. So we'll say vm.businesses 0. And just to make this work quick, I'm not going to call get employees from our save method. I'm also going to comment out the employees.remove all. And let's click run on the simulator. And if I perform the action, I scroll down, it filtered only for employees that business is of Apple. And obviously a filter like this is very valuable in your app, because if you have maybe like a business page, you're going to want to get all of the employees for a business, and you can use these really simple filters. So moving on, I'm just going to comment this out. I'm going to put the get employees back in. I'm going to put the employees.remove all back in. And before we move on, I just want to note that this business is equal to is perfect when it's a 2-1, relationship. So on this business, we have 2-1, and that's why we could filter on it. We actually can't do that same filter when it is too many. So I'm going to fold up some of this code because we're doing so much here. And let's even fold up this save. Let's rerun the simulator just to get back to our starting state. And the final thing I want to touch on before I end this video is deleting, because deleting is very important in core data. So let's start by first trying to delete, let's delete the finance department. So let's say func delete department, open close parentheses, open brackets. Let's get the finance department, which is the third in our array here. So we'll say let department equals departments number 2, which is the third. And we'll simply call manager.context.delete, and we'll pass in the department. After we delete them, we just need to call save as we always do, and it should delete. Now, what we need to think about is what we want to do with all of the relationships that this department has. So if we delete this finance department, let's just talk about the employees right now. Emily's the only employee. So what do we want to happen if we delete this finance department? Do we want Emily to also be deleted? Or do we want Emily to remain and maybe just not be part of the finance department anymore? Or do we want to not allow the finance department to be deleted until all the employees are removed first? So if we go into the container, and I'll go through that one more time. If we look at the department entity and we click on the employees, we open the inspector, there is a delete rule. And right now it's set to nullify. And that basically means if we delete this finance department, Emily will stay where she is. She will just lose the finance department on her card here. So she will stay in the system, but she will no longer be part of a finance department because finance is gone. If we change this to Cascade, then if we delete the finance department, all of the employees for the finance department will be removed from the system. So if I had it on Cascade and I remove the finance department, Emily would then get deleted. And lastly, if I put it on deny, if I try to remove the finance department, it actually won't let me delete the finance department until there are no employees left. So because Emily is here, this would actually just cause an error, and the finance department wouldn't delete and Emily wouldn't delete. So this is another very important rule that you have to set for all of your relationships, but I'm not going to go through all of that. I'm just going to go through this quickly. So let's keep it as deny real quick. And going back into our app, I'm going to call this delete department from our button. Let's call vm.delete department. Let's run the simulator. Delete department is accessing the third item in the array, which is the finance department. Emily is the only employee. And remember, I put it on deny. So we shouldn't be able to delete this finance department until there are no employees. So if I go to perform action, so I'm going to open up the console here, and if I go to perform action, we actually get the error saving core data. Items cannot be deleted from employees. So we got an error. The marketing department looks like it's gone here. And Emily is still here, but you can see Emily's still part of the finance department. So there's an issue here. And if I rerun the simulator, I believe the department will still pop up here. The finance department came back. So we didn't actually delete it because we had this delete rule in place, which is kind of like a safety check. if I instead had made this Cascade, when I go to run this, I'm going to click the button and it should delete the finance, and then because it's Cascade, it will also delete all of the employees related that are part of the finance department. So right now we have Emily at the bottom here. If I perform action, reload, we'll see the finance department's gone, it's saved successfully, and Emily is no longer in our app. Sorry, Emily, you are gone. You have cascaded out with the finance department. And while we're here, let's just check out the Nullify. So I'm going to this time delete the engineering department, and let's go to the departments. Let's change it to 1 for the engineering department. Let's click run on the simulator one final time. And this time we have Nullify. So if we delete the engineering department, it should leave John in place, still in our system, but remove him from the engineering department. Let's click the button. Reloads. The department is gone. It's saved successfully. And if we look at John's card, he now just does not have a department. So Nullify is kind of like the safest bet here. I also want to point out, as we deleted those, all of our other cards also updated because they're all relationships, right? So Facebook, those departments are gone. We don't have an engineering department. We don't have our finance department. The employees have been updated. Emily is gone from Microsoft because all of our data is related to each other. Alright guys, this was probably the longest video in this course, the longest video I think I've done on YouTube so far. And it was also probably the most complicated because there was a ton that I wanted to get through. I would say most of the time when I use core data in apps, it's very simple. We create one entity, we save that entity, we fetch that entity, we update that entity, and there are no relationships. But sometimes you're going to have to create complex relationships. And I hope this was a really good in-depth look at how we can create and manage these relationships in our app. We did one-to-one relationships, we did one-to-many relationships, we added relationships, updated relationships, we deleted relationships, and I think you should now be super comfortable using core data. Alright guys, if you are still listening to me talk right now, a big thank you because this was such a long video, and I apologize for making it so long. I really could just not find an easier or shorter way to get through all of this. I remade this video, believe it or not, like 2 or 3 times because some of this gets super complicated and I was really trying to just simplify it down. So let me know in the comments if I still made it too confusing or if you learned a little something and you enjoyed this video. Thank you guys for listening. As always, I'm Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.